Welcome to a new video about Sisir. In this video, I am going to showcase the new real-time render module. As an example, I'm going to load the scene I am currently working on. All right, the scene has loaded. Now, if I want to activate the new render module, I can either click the render button up here, or I can simply press the R key. R stands for render. So when I press it, after a couple of seconds, the render module is initialized and ready to use. This is what you are going to see by default. So let's start talking about the viewport settings. Right now, the camera light is turned on, which means the light source comes from the camera, same as the other modules. You can change the light intensity, the color. Down here, you can change the ambient intensity and color as well. However, what probably most people are going to use is this setting up here that says use image-based lighting. As soon as I turn it on, the background loads the HDR image, and now the ambient light comes directly from the HDR background. I can increase the blur slider to fake some sort of depth of field effect. I can tweak the intensity, and I can change the rotation. With a proper background image, I probably want to turn off the camera light. Now the light switched to a directional light, and we can adjust the position with these sliders. I can change the elevation and change the rotation. For this particular background, I will try to match the light position to this big window here. And I'll tweak the intensity a bit, maybe set it to 2. This will do for now. Let's now talk about shadows. From here, you can turn the shadows off if you want to, and you can tweak the softness from sharp to very soft. Next, let's talk about contact shadows. Contact shadows are a form of screen space shadow designed to add shadows to small details that the regular shadow cannot capture. So for example, if I drop the distance to the minimum and increase the thickness, I can start to see shadows casted from small elements like eyebrows and eyelashes. It might be a little hard to see, but if I increase the intensity and turn it on and off, the difference is quite obvious. Contact shadows are also useful to add a bit more shadow areas where you expect the hair to create ambient occlusion on the mesh. Speaking of occlusion, down here we can turn on Voxel ambient occlusion. This will add ambient occlusion to the mesh. Turning it on and off, there is a pretty dramatic difference. You can see the huge difference it makes in areas where there is only ambient light, like the ear. Without ambient occlusion is pretty much flat, but ambient occlusion will bring up all the shapes. I will talk about the lens flare a bit later. Let's move on to the tone mapping settings. By default, the render module uses AGX Punchy because it has a nice filmic tone and good contrast. However, from this menu, you have other tone mapping presets. If you turn it off or set it to linear, no tone mapping is applied, so you can do the tone mapping in a separate software if you like. Or you can pick one of the other presets. At the bottom, there are a bunch of optimization settings. If you are experiencing bad performance, you can try messing with these settings. Here you can see some telemetry, and you can turn off this panel by unchecking the Show Stats Overlay checkbox. All right, let's now move on to the hair material. The hair shader has 2 modes, melanin and color. If I move the melanin, you can see that some of the hair change color. This is because the hairline set has its own material ID assigned. From this menu, I can select all my hair sets and I can assign unique materials to each one. Let's select main, which is the big spiky hair here. I can verify this by switching to the hair module, and you can see that main is the dark green hair set. I'll show how to assign different material IDs in a moment, but now with the main set selected, I can see it has ID 1 assigned. So if I now move the melanin slider, the shader is going through the physically based melanin values for human hair. So it goes from white to blonde to red to brown and then black. Next, we have melanin redness, which adds a bit more red tones and boosts the saturation of the base melanin value. the random melanin slider is pretty self-explanatory. It will randomize the melanin values for each individual hair, so you can have a nice variation instead of a flat melanin color. Next, we have the roughness sliders. For physically based hair, we have three main roughness settings. These settings will change drastically the way your hair will look and feel. Especially the vertical roughness is the setting that can make your hair look from dull and flat to wet and metallic. It's up to you to find a value that you like. The circular roughness essentially boosts the brightness of the specular highlights, so you need to tweak this along with the vertical roughness for optimal results. And then the main roughness is mostly going to sharpen the brightest parts of the highlights, so it can make the hair look more wet. Next, we have the hair width scale. This allows you to tweak the thickness of the hair. However, keep in mind that this slider will only affect the render module. It does not change the effective thickness of the hair. Next, we have the root scalp blend. Let me zoom in to show the effect. Take a look at the root of the hair. You may notice that it's semi-transparent. By changing the slider, I can make it more opaque or more transparent close to the hair roots. This will help to blend the hair a little bit better with the mesh. Next, we have the backscatter scale. This settings works in conjunction with a global parameter, which is the light scatter density. To demonstrate the effect, let me set the environment to black so it's easy to see. Here we have the light scatter density. This setting defines how much light scatters through the hair volume. By default is set to 1, but if I lower it to, let's say, 0.5 or even 0.2, now more light is scattering through the hair, and now I can go back and tweak the backscatter scale to essentially multiply the effect. You can adjust these settings to get the amount of scattering that you like. However, keep in mind that the light scattering density is a global setting, so all your hair sets will have the same value regardless of the material ID. Then we have the indirect light multiplier. This is pretty simple. It basically just multiplies the ambient light contribution on the hair. And finally, we get the other global setting, which is the hair ambient occlusion. You can enable it and then tweak the intensity to get some nice ambient occlusion effect on the hair. The occlusion is based on the hair density, so it will be darker in denser areas and lighter in sparse areas. Okay, now we can switch to the other shader mode, which is color. With this mode, the melanin settings are replaced by a series of color sets, each one with a ramp that can be fully adjusted, enabling you to create more customized colors. Each color set has a weight slider, so you can tweak how much of a set is applied to the hair. For example, if I increase the color B weight to the max, you can see that now I have 50% of color A and 50% color B. And if I drag color C to the max, now I have about 33% of each set. And I can mix and match and change the percentage the way I like. And each color sets have 3 color ramps that can be fully adjusted by dragging these handles that allow you to reposition the colors along the hair length. So let's quickly create a couple of sets with more reasonable colors. And now I can just blend them together and do some final adjustment. All right, I think this looks pretty good, but now it's time to address the hairline. The reason why it didn't change, it's because it has assigned a different material. Let's go to the Hair Set Material tab. From here, you can select a hair set, and you can see that hairline is assigned a material ID 2. And if I now move some of the slider, it's indeed affecting the hairline. If I want to assign a new material, I simply select another ID, for example, ID 3. If I switch between 2 and 3, the material assigned to the hairline changes. But for this scene, I want to assign the same material I used on the main hair. If I don't remember what ID it was, I simply select the main hair, and I can see it was the ID 1. So now I switch back to hairline and just click on 1 to assign the same material ID. All right, let's now move on to the mesh material. There are several parameters for the mesh shader, but to keep the video short, I will only cover the most useful settings. You get your standard settings like color, where you can simply change the color of the mesh. Then roughness, so you can tweak how shiny your mesh is. The lower the value, the shinier and more plasticky it looks. Then metalness is going to change the specular model to respond like a metallic surface. If the color is white, roughness is 0 and metalness is 1, you essentially get chrome. Then if you just increase the roughness a bit, you get some sort of brushed metal effect, which is pretty neat. Now, the other parameters require to have a texture assigned. So let's assign some textures. I'm going to select a color texture. This is a metahuman character, by the way. Okay. It looks a bit dark, so maybe I'll adjust the light intensity a little bit. That's good. Next, for the roughness, I don't have a dedicated texture, so I'll just set a value with the slider. I'm going to keep the metalness at 0 because it's a human character, of course. But I am going to assign a normal map since I do have one. This normal map is very high resolution, so I don't need to add a detailed normal map. However, overall, the skin looks a bit plasticky. So here's where we are going to turn on the subsurface scattering. And right away, it makes quite a big difference, but we can tweak it a bit further. I'm going to temporarily set the environment to black so I can focus on the shader. And I think I am going to change the tone mapping to something a little less saturated. Then I can just tune the subsurface scattering parameters until I get something that looks good. I want the skin to look soft but organic. I don't want it to look too waxy. Okay, I think this looks pretty good. One thing to keep in mind is that when subsurface scattering is turned on, the voxel ambient occlusion becomes a lot softer, so you might want to compensate by increasing the intensity. There is one more setting in the hair shader that we didn't discuss. You can actually assign a color texture to drive the hair color. In order to map the texture, Sisir uses the UV coordinates of the loaded mesh as reference. Let me demonstrate what I mean. I'm going to replace the color texture with something that has a pattern on it. You don't need to do this. I do it only for demonstration purposes, so it's easier to understand. Okay, now I got this leopard pattern assigned. Next, I'm going to make the hair white, so the only color will come from the texture. And now I am going to assign the same leopard texture to the hair. And as you can see, the hair color is now using the texture and the coordinates match perfectly with the mesh. This is very useful if you want to create hair with a specific pattern, for example, a cat or a tiger or something like that. Now I'm going to reassign the face texture to show you that you don't need to change it in the first place, but I think it made the point clear. Now, the only thing left to do is to assign a different material to eyebrows and eyelashes because I don't want it to have the leopard texture. So I will select the eyebrows hair set and assign the material ID 3 and then just use the melanin to make it black. And then simply select the eyelashes hair set and also assign it to material ID 3 so it will use the same material as the eyebrows. Just for fun, let's assign another color texture, maybe something more colorful. So I select the main hair set and load another texture. Let's go with this one. Looks very nice. And again, you don't need to do it, but just to double check, I'm going to load the same texture for the head. And you can see the colors match perfectly. This actually looks very nice. It looks like some artistic face paint. But yeah, assigning a texture is another way you can create interesting and unique color designs for your hair. Lastly, let's talk about the lens flare settings. To showcase it a little bit better, I'm going to load a different HDR background, perhaps something with a bit more contrast and highlights. All right, this looks good. And let me adjust the lighting a little bit, something like that. Okay, good. Now, if I scroll down here and activate the lens flare settings, you can see that immediately the image becomes more bloomy. From the bloom intensity, I can dial down the effect a bit. Keep in mind that all the lens flare settings are reading the brightness values from the HDR background. Next, we got the glare intensity. The glare will create some sort of star lens flare around the brightest areas of the image. For example, up here, you can see that the light creates this star-shaped effect. This works very well with the sun, for example. Next, we have the ghost intensity. This simulates the reflection of the brightest areas on the multiple lenses inside the camera. And then there's the halo intensity. This adds an additional lens reflection with this curved shape to look like a lens distortion. Lastly, we have the flare resolution. This setting will make the overall lens flare more soft and blurry. However, keep in mind that if your HDR background is also blurred, that will affect the lens flare as well. All right, this is the final scene. As you may notice, I have added a bit more detail, like the peach fuzz on her face. If I press F2, this is what the hair module looks like. I got my hair sets over here. And if you are interested, this is what the guides look like. Very simple stuff. I got my layers up here. I simply used the draw guides feature with the head mesh set to reference, so I could easily draw the peach fuzz guides, the eyebrows, etc. Perhaps I will make a video of how I work in the future. But yeah, this is what the final version looks like in the render module. And one thing I forgot to mention is that if you press F11, you can switch to full screen. So you can take screenshots without the UI in the way. I think overall looks pretty good. So that's it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. I will keep improving and adding more feature to the render module, but I felt like this was a good starting point and I look forward to see what you can make with it. If you want to try Sisir yourself, simply join the Discord. The link is in the description below. You can download it for free and use it as much as you want, as long as it's not for commercial use. Keep in mind that Sisir is very much a work in progress, so expect bugs, crashes, and other issues, but you can help me improve the tool by giving feedback and also feel free to suggest more features that you want to see implemented. So join the Discord and go download Sisir. I will see you there.